Good evening, everybody. We are here with another presentation for our presentation series, actually with one of our sister organizations, GeyserTimes, and with Jake Young going over a history and where they want to take that platform in the future. And with that, we will go ahead and kick it to Jake.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, my name is Jake Young. I'm the president and founder of GeyserTimes, geysertimes.org. I'm just going to give you a little background on how GeyserTimes came to be and what we're thinking about doing for the future. So thanks for joining. So GeyserTimes is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, first started in 2011. So it's been 13 years already. A nonprofit organization dedicated to the acquisition, preservation, and dissemination of geyser-related data. So under acquisition, we support multiple data sources such as field observations, temperature loggers, and logbook transcripts. More on that in a minute. Preservation, we maintain the technical infrastructure necessary for long-term storage, including our servers and our domain. And dissemination, we provide open access to the data through websites, archive files, programming interfaces, and scientific tool sets. GeyserTimes is completely donation and volunteer supported. So, GeyserTimes, if you're watching this video, you probably already have an idea what GeyserTimes is. I'd like to give you a little background on its origin story or how I came to be involved with it. So, like many people who are into geysers, it started with an early childhood trip to Yellowstone. Now, my family would always go to Yellowstone because my dad is a big fly fisherman, and Yellowstone is a mecca for dry fly fishing for trout. So that was the main reason when we go. I would get hooked on Yellowstone and later work there during some summers during college. Um, and that's the photo on the right hand side. There is me. I'm probably about 19 years old, deep in the backcountry of Yellowstone. Um, just really love getting out and exploring hiking in Yellowstone. So it started with that for me. And then I asked my parents to send another photo of me. And I just said, send me the earliest photo you have of me in the thermal features in Yellowstone. And they sent a few photos back. So the one on the left there, that is not me, that's my brother. And my parents said, we couldn't find any photos of you because you always had the camera or you're off running around and didn't want your picture to be taken. So that's my brother on one of our early childhood trips, posing somewhere in the Norris Geyser Basin, uh, just as evidence that my family was there way back. And that's probably in 1989. But back to the origin story. So, got hooked on Yellowstone as a kid. Uh, when I was in college, I got involved with the Yellowstone Loon chat page online, kind of the early days of uh, communication on the internet. And there's a chat page that call themselves the Yellowstone Loons. I still have one of the hats from that group. People are not necessarily geyser gazers or terribly interested in geysers, but just all things Yellowstone, and really found a home there. And then that kind of converted into uh, chatting with people on an Old Faithful Cam Chat page. And then when I would visit uh, the Upper Geyser Basin in Yellowstone, Ralph Taylor would hand out these pieces of paper that had analysis from all of his data logger uh, eruption captures. And to me, that was just like the most amazing piece of information I could be given. So that was a real inspiration. Um, Somewhere between college and starting GeyserTimes, I gained some programming experience when in my actuarial job. I used to work as an actuary. I kind of got to know about serious use of spreadsheets and how databases work and Started learning coding there. So that was all a big part of it. But also another pretty big part of uh, why I started Geyser Times was I have a real inability to organize, remember things, or write things down. So I was always in awe of those geyser gazers that had these super thick, detailed notebooks. They could remember every eruption they ever saw that was special, who was there, what the weather was like, very detailed. Um, well, I mean, true scientists. Whereas me, I would take some like the back of a McDonald's receipt and write down what people had for some beehive eruption times. And it was just all chicken scratched up. And I'd fold that thing up and put it in my pocket and try to hold on to it for a few days while guys are gazing so I could do my doodle calculations on there. That system barely worked for me. And I always wanted something better, but I was way too lazy to do it with pen and paper. So as I think back to the times before geyser times existed in Yellowstone, tracking geyser eruptions really went like this, as I recall it. So a geyser would erupt, somebody would see it, observe it, they would write that down, the time that it happened. They probably would call it out on a radio if they're observing that eruption in real time. And they call the geyser and the time that they're calling the eruption. Other people would hear that. They would all write it down. The rangers in the visitor center at Old Faithful, they might hear it and then they would write it down. But they wouldn't just write it down in their own personal logbook, they would write it down in the logbook. So that logbook, I mean, that thing is like the single source of truth. This is all geyser activity that has occurred that year at primarily the Upper Geyser Basin in Yellowstone, but also eruptions of Lone Star Geyser as they were reported. Um, that thing was amazing. And if the visitor center was burning down and I was running in to save people or something, I would grab that logbook and save it before anything else in that visitor center. That's the most amazing artifact that there could ever be at the Upper Geyser Basin for me. Um, and that logbook really was something special. People took great care of that thing. The rangers were the gatekeepers of it. And some geyser gazers had prestige enough where they got to write in the logbook themselves. If you were reporting an eruption and they didn't know who you were, your eruption entry might get the letters VR next to it for a visitor report. So there was a lot of system already in place for tracking geyser eruptions, and Geyser Times is just about making that electronic and making it work with the internet. So back in 2011, the first version of GeyserTimes.org was released, and thanks to the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, I was able to grab this snapshot of what it looked like when their archiving system crawled over GeyserTimes.org and took a snapshot of it back in July 10th, 2011. Geyser Times officially started on April 15th of 2011 of that year. And really it was being beta tested for quite a long time by webcam viewers. So people watching the old, I don't know how many reincarnations we are now into the Old Faithful streaming webcam, but originally it was a static image that I believe updated every 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Sometimes it paused. But you could see Old Faithful, you could see Geyser Hill and some of the down basin steam clouds. So if we look at this screen right here, when this snapshot was taken, actually over on the right-hand side, that table is labeled not just the current interval that each geyser is on right now, as known to Geyser Times, but it says for webcam viewers. So webcam viewers specifically, here's all the geysers for you. So that you can see that the audience kind of was targeted towards webcam viewers because they were the ones that were most capable of entering data in a real time fashion. People at probably at home, some people goofing off at work, watching the old faithful Geyser cam, and then could pull up Geyser Times in their web browser and enter in the eruptions that they observed right there. Cell phones did exist at the time. Uh, 2G was like the top connection speed you could get at Old Faithful back then. Um, so there was some opportunity to to use phones, but it certainly is nothing like it is now. And that was a real struggle to use a mobile device inside Yellowstone National Park to get this information, although it could be done. But in the early days, it was heavily geared towards webcam operators. And at the same moment in time, another person who I only knew in passing, Alan Glennon, he developed Geyser Notebook for Android. And I found an old screenshot of that as well. So here it was in the Android or the Google Play Store. Geyser Notebook. There's a screenshot down at the bottom, a little video, and then you can see a screenshot of a mobile device where you can add a new report or see some predictions or see a timeline. So independently, the two of us were developing essentially the same thing, the same concept, trying to solve the same problem with uh, two two different routes. Um, and so pretty quickly we found out about each other and joined forces to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes. We're all working for the common good. And um, we had it set up where anybody entering an observation in Geyser Notebook would send over to Geyser Times and be stored there. And it's pretty cool. But we kind of took different launch paths, and then I really focused on webcam viewers with Geyser Times, and Alan's app was a lot more visitor friendly and not geared directly to the geyser gazing community. So by 2014, this is when Geyser Times Android app was being released. Will Bogle, who introduced me at the beginning of this video, he took it upon himself to develop an Android app that was specific for Geyser Times, and he just ran with it. By that time, there's a few more options in the menu up at the top of Geyser Times. We're no longer referencing the webcam. Visitors only on the right-hand side list of geysers, but we've added, some values for sunrise and sunset. And there's additional functionality up here. You can click on the geyser names, and it'll take you to a specific geyser page. So the options were growing. By 2015, there was a facelift of the homepage. It looked a lot more modern at the time, going to this style of web interface. And then by 2020, it pretty much looks like it does now today as a website. New branding, a little bit different layout, but not too different from before, and just a lot more functionality behind the scenes. So the Geyser Times team today has grown and grown. I can't thank all of these people enough for all that they've given to Geyser Times and continue to give. Been really great people to work with. Yeah, before I move on, let's go back. So all these people are members of Geyser Times because uh, they either asked to be or we recruited them. We're always looking for people who are interested in Geyser data and especially coding. So if you know anybody who would be interested or you yourself are interested, please send me an email. And yeah, let's talk. And as much as we focus in Geyser Times on geyser eruption data, it is not the biggest data set that we have in Geyser Times, even though there's well over 1 million eruptions uh, documented in Geyser Times. There's actually 147 million rows of temperature logger data from various projects that have been running over the years. Including Yellowstone Volcano Observatory's data loggers that are at the Norris Geyser Basin, any ones that have been in runoff channels that are geyser related, Geyser Times is storing. And that adds up to a lot of data. So the future of Geyser Times. So these are some plans are in the works and other things are opportunities, let's call them right now. A big one is retooling the supporting infrastructure. So, 2011 was quite a long time ago, 13 years ago. When I started it, I didn't know a lot about web programming. Um, and I made a lot of mistakes. And some of those mistakes are functional. This is just a lesson for anybody out there starting a coding project. You got to go through a period of learning, and sometimes you're going to make mistakes, and sometimes you can fix those mistakes and patch them up good enough so that they work. But then you reach a point like today where we're going to do all these really cool things, and then we go back to that code and then we say, Jake, what were you thinking when you wrote it this way? Because this is written in a way where we can't add on to it. Um, we can't make the changes that we want to make. So it needs to be modernized, it needs to be retooled and brought up to a modern framework. That is a ton of work. That is all behind the scenes and will take several weeks or months of project planning and coding to get that done. But that's a big thing that needs to be done to move Geyser Times ahead into the future. So with that, improved mobile device performance, we get a lot of good ratings of our apps on the iOS store. What was that I called for Apple? Sorry, I'm not an Apple guy. And the Play Store for Google. And we get a lot of great comments and high star ratings. But if you look at the low star ratings, people are like, this app doesn't work. It didn't connect. And we do have some connectivity issues with the Geyser Times database. And so there's improvements to be occasionally. And if somebody doesn't know that they need to refresh or try again in 5 minutes or something and get frustrated and leave, um, that could be fixed with a modern infrastructure. And so that's something we're looking to do. Geyser Times will combine entries from different observers right now. So 5 people can say, I saw Old Faithful erupt at noon. And those will all go into Geyser Times as 5 separate observations. And Geyser Times will run an algorithm to group those all together and display it as one observation. And we call the entries primary or secondary entries. That is not a great way to combine entries. There's better ways to do it. So we want to fix that. Improve data quality mechanisms. So Geyser Times really found it to be community controlled. Um, no longer is there necessarily a single keeper or very small team of keepers of the information that's getting written into a logbook. Now it's the community in GeyserTimes. And that was a conscious decision made. But the way we do that right now is through what are called flags and confirmations. And those cause some strife in the community when those, especially when those flags get used to say, to declare to somebody else, no, your observation is incorrect. A lot of times it is incorrect, and the person goes, oh, yeah, I didn't mean that erupted at 1200. It was actually at 1300. I just typoed it in. And that's fine. But there are other situations where it gets a little more gray area, and we need better data quality moderation tools that aren't just through the act of flagging. SMS text interface. So uh, to use GeyserTimes, you've needed an internet connection or a data connection on a mobile device over cell phone um, to enter information into GeyserTimes or to get information out of it. We did have requests probably around, I don't know, 2017, like, hey, can you make it so I can submit an observation by sending a text to a number because I don't have a fancy smartphone with an internet interface on it already. So I looked into that a little bit and decided, okay, is this really going to be worth it? And kind of hemmed and hawed about, like, it's a lot of work. It's going to cost us more money. Um, and then eventually, smartphones just kind of exploded. You couldn't live life without one, so everybody got one, and that issue went away. Now, latest iPhones that are coming out and Android phones have plans for this as well. You can text via satellite. They have a chip in the phones that can communicate with satellites, not with cell phone towers on the ground. So that is a coming wave of opportunity to interact with geyser information that's in GeyserTimes. So uh, it's very, very plausible within a few years that many consumer grade mobile devices will be able to communicate with satellites through a text interface, just send in 140 characters of information. Um, but you could be, if you were at Shoshone Geyser Basin, which is this background photo right here, um, this is Union Geyser, which has not been seen in eruption since the 1970s. If you were there and you saw it erupting, and you had a cell phone that can communicate with satellites, then you could submit an observation to GeyserTimes through a text that you're observing Union Geyser, because that is something that a lot of people would want to know about. There's a lot of opportunity to engage casual visitors in citizen science. Um, Alan, I think, was super visionary back in 2011 when he did Geyser Notebook. His original vision was everybody going to Old Faithful would have the app and they could all submit all of the observations that they're seeing. That you would get 100 people saying, I saw Old Faithful erupt at noon. What a different style that would be compared to how GeyserTimes has been used up until this point, which has been more for hardcore geyser gazers and adjacent individuals, like super motivated visitors that know something about geysers tend to be the ones that submit information to GeyserTimes. There's a lot of opportunity to do something that would engage the casual visitors and get quality information from people that maybe don't know as much of the details about what they're observing. Sophisticated prediction systems. Keep waiting for somebody to come up with an amazing prediction for Beehive or maybe Steamboat, or there's a lot more information out there. And this whole machine learning AI wave, those are buzzwords to be sure, but there will be something to be said for that in geyser predictions in the near future, I think. We want to keep encouraging real time sensor monitoring. Mara Reed's presentation earlier in this series was about long term monitoring at Norris, and there's been a renewed momentum in that area. So we need to be ready to support that in whichever direction that goes. And then we just want to continue GeyserTimes open ecosystem. This is open to everybody. Everybody can participate. That it's free to use. Uh, no plans for changing any of that. So that being said, thank you to all the supporters of GeyserTimes. As I said, we're donation driven and volunteer supported. So thanks to all of you who have donated. The money goes towards our server costs and domain upgrades and uh, the infrastructure that supports GeyserTimes. So thank you so much to all of you. Um, with that, can take any questions. I'm monitoring the chat on YouTube, so if you enter anything in there, I can respond to it.
Thank you, Jake. I'll go ahead and start you off with a question, Jake. So, where did the name Geyser Times come from?
GeyserTimes. So way back when on that old faithful cam chat page, when I told people I was trying out programming a electronic logbook and it would need a name, um, one of the users, Casey Mule, uh, came up with that name GeyserTimes, and I really liked it because to me it kind of reminded me of a old timey newspaper name like the GeyserTimes. Um, and it just seemed to kind of roll off the tongue more than the other suggestions. So went with that. And that kind of defined the early branding that I just invented, like the early black header bar on GeyserTimes. To me, I was making it look like a old newspaper from the late 1800s or something. So what size of user base does GT GeyserTimes have, either in registered or casual users? Um, yeah, so user base. So there are, last I checked, I believe 1,100 people that have made an account to GeyserTimes. So the only reason to really make an account would be if you want to enter observations. That's um, there. There is no account creation requirement to view eruptions. So kind of like 1,100 people that have gone far enough as to make an account for GeyserTimes. Um, Active users, it's a little harder to measure. Um, in because we do have some user tracking stuff on the website, but we don't have it on the apps at all. So the Android app has been installed over 10,000 times. Um, During the peak of summer in Yellowstone, GeyserTimes would get 40,000 unique visitors. And that would kind of peak in early August. But with the uptake in the app installs, that number had dropped last I looked, but I haven't looked in quite a long time. So, yeah, I think that answers those questions. Somewhere between 1,000 and 50,000. I don't know how many total people have ever used GeyserTimes, probably in the hundreds of thousands by now. Um, if only when they type into a search engine what times Old Faithful erupt, GeyserTimes shows up pretty highly in those rankings. Pat Snyder had a question. Adding moonrise and moonset would be helpful. Yes, it would. The math of adding moon rises and moon sets is, even though they can predict exactly where an eclipse is going to fall across the face of the earth, that is very dependent on your exact geographic location. So we've tried in the past to add some moonrise moonset times, but they would be different for the upper geyser basin, lower geyser basin, midway, anywhere along, because your immediate surroundings really dictate what time the moon starts to add brightness. Um, but I'm interested in revisiting it again. But that was what we had in the past when we tried to uh, use different calculations from other websites. It just didn't seem to line up with reality. Um, Next question here. Any thoughts on tooling portions of GeyserTimes to deal with to build better with specific geysers? Yes, lots of thoughts, i.e., a daisy or fountain group page or something to help distinguish long lasting geysers like sawmill or grotto. Yeah, so right. Uh, I think one thing that helped GeyserTimes take off when other attempts may have failed in the past was trying to um, accommodate specific geyser types. Like the it will accept old faithful eruptions as longs or shorts instead of just majors and minors or some other kind of qualifier. Even though Old Faithful is the only geyser, I believe, where we traditionally document them as long or short eruptions. Um, but yeah, there's a lot we could do. So the combined entries thing, like, it's pretty easy for an algorithm to tell if a bunch of people submit their observations of Old Faithful that they all which ones apply to the same eruption event. That is not so easy with geysers that last hours and hours and hours, and people don't sit there and observe them constantly. Um, so yeah, for a grotto geyser that can erupt for an hour or 24 hours or longer, if you see an eruption now and you see it erupting 24 hours from now, is that the same eruption? Is that the different eruption? Is that 3 eruptions in between? 4? We just don't have a good system for GeyserTimes is not good at knowing what those differences are. So it really relies on the community to police that and say, no, that actually was a separate eruption. But yeah, we do have some thoughts on paper anyway about having different geyser group visualizations. I think there's a lot we could do with that. And uh, if you've got suggestions for other improvements, feel free to send those to support@geysertimes.org, or you can send them to my email that you see here on the screen too, jyoung@geysertimes.org, if you don't end up asking them here. Another question. How come sometimes the NPS prediction and GT predictions of certain geysers are different? That is, I've seen Old Faithful predicted by NPS at 13:15 plus or minus 20 minutes, and GeyserTimes at 13:18 plus or minus 15 minutes. Well, that's because we have a different prediction calculation running on GeyserTimes. I think historically, one of the reasons that GeyserTimes is different, well, for one thing, we don't know when the National Park Service updates their prediction algorithm. They don't send us a note that says, hey, at 8 a.m. this morning, we started using 95 minutes between Old Faithful eruptions instead of 93 minutes. So just in that, we would be off. But historically, I thought, well, we can do better at predicting than the Park Service because we have access to all this super real time data, and we can be even more accurate with the predictions on something like Old Faithful and just shave off a couple minutes of the window on either side. So we've experimented with that over the years, and so it does create different prediction windows. It's a great questions. I love prediction, and I um, would love to do a lot more in that space. There's a lot of stuff you could do. But something I did learn early on with predicting me with my heavy math, statistical, actuarial background, I would get upset when I would see that the Park Service's prediction of a grand geyser, for example, was not the best prediction it could be. But what your definition of best is different. For me, the best prediction is one that absolutely minimizes the window and maximizes the opportunity to see the geyser erupt inside that window. And turns out when you're dealing with millions of visitors coming to Yellowstone, that may not be the definition of best. The best is when everybody has a reasonable opportunity to see the eruption based on the prediction they were given. So the Park Service tends to artificially set the opening of a window earlier than is almost statistically possible for a geyser like Grand to erupt. So that um, the sorry, just getting a message. I need to get out of the sunlight that's setting here in Salt Lake City. Um, yeah, so they artificially set the eruption window early, so that people would think that they need to be there then and have an opportunity to be seated down at Grand by the time the eruption actually starts. Um, so I really learned a lot about human behavior, and not all people are cold calculating mathematicians like myself and want the best prediction to be the smallest window with the maximum chance. That may not always be the case. So that's another difference between a Park Service prediction and geyser time prediction. Another question came in. How often does GeyserTimes update predictions? If a geyser changes its interval per se, does it automatically update or does someone enter the new prediction window by hand? So our system right now is entering a prediction window by hand. I would love to have it be more automated. It's nuanced enough where that also makes me nervous to create an automated system. It certainly can be done. Um, but currently, geyser time predictions are those prediction windows are updated by hand. But the calculations themselves are running they'll update every minute. Um, there's just a system on a timer that just looks in GeyserTimes when was the last eruption of a geyser, and then applies the predetermined window length or interval length to that time, and then shows it in GeyserTimes. So if a new eruption came, as soon as Old Faithful's latest eruption time gets entered, a prediction comes immediately after that, shows up. But as geysers change their behavior and deserve a different prediction window, that is updated by hand.
Okay.
Well,
I think we'll go ahead and call that. And as always, for both organizations, if any of you guys want to help, feel free to reach out to our main emails. And I know definitely with more people, we can get more things done and get some amazing things done. And it's been amazing to see how this platform that got started has really revolutionized how guys are gazers. Uh, Basically do everything. So with that, we do have Micah's presentation. Goes to president. He is presenting on Mickey Hot Springs next week, and then we will have a 1 week break. And not sure if we've gone in on the website yet, but after that 1 week break after Micah, we are going to have Graham is going to do a presentation on some of his observations during his last winter visit, which I believe will include some of the economic stuff. So we will see you guys all next week.